Welcome to the Startup of the Year podcast, where each episode we showcase exciting new companies from around the world. This podcast is produced by Established, creators of the Startup of the Year program. Established is focused on helping organizations with their innovation, startup, and communication strategies.
Welcome back to the Startup of the Year podcast. I'm Frank Gruber, the co-founder and co-CEO of Established, co-founder of Established Ventures, and the team behind the Startup of the Year community and this very podcast. On this episode, it's number 100. If you can believe that, that's amazing. We've been doing this a few years and excited to get to episode 100. As today, I'll be talking with Mike Evans. It seems fitting. He was at some of our earliest events back in Chicago when I first got started with Tech Cocktail in 2006. He was just getting started with GrubHub, and today we're going to talk about what he's been up to. And most of you know him probably as the co-founder of GrubHub. He also is the co-founder of another company that just started a few years ago called Fixer, and that's a Chicago-based company that's the right now handyman service, and they're starting to expand, so that's pretty exciting. Mike also has a new book, and it's called Hangry, A Startup Journey, which is his memoir about co-founding GrubHub that published on November 1st. Go grab yourself a copy if you haven't already. It's such a real book. I think you'll enjoy it. If you go to mikeevans.com, it's Mike, MikeEvans.com. You can learn more about the book. You can also find it anywhere books are sold. It's, I think, on its way to being a bestseller, and I'm excited to be talking to Mike here shortly about it. Before we dive in, though, I wanted to take a moment to, celebrate. I'm all about that. If you read my book, Startup Mixology, you probably know that. But we have to celebrate these milestones along the way. When you're starting and running companies, there's a lot of things that are fun, but there's a lot of ups and downs too. And obviously, this is one that's exciting. We've got 100 episodes out here in a second once we get this episode done of the Startup of the Year podcast. And I'm thrilled to say that we've been able to accomplish that. But we couldn't do it without all of you as listeners. So I wanted to take a moment to thank you all for being here and being a part of our Startup of the Year community and listening regularly to this podcast. I would love to ask that we, continue to listen, obviously, because I definitely love having you. But if you have anybody you think might find it helpful, this podcast, please do share it. We want to continue to expand our reach and help as many people as possible. But again, couldn't do it without you. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this growing community. And we're here to help you. Obviously, I also want to thank all the people that helped to make it possible. The list is too long. This goes back a few years, and we've had a lot of different cooks in the kitchen, if you will. But we seem to have found consistency and a regular voice, I guess you could say, with this current format. So appreciate all those that have been a part of it, continue to shape it on a regular basis. I really appreciate it. And obviously couldn't do it without our current producer, John Gaidos. He's our COO. He's been building this out for the last couple of years with me. And we've had a lot of fun doing it. So thank you, Johnny. Good times. Those of you that probably listen to or might listen to our Startup or Somewhat Frank podcast, he's on there as well. And appreciate his involvement in being able to help keep this as consistent as we can as we try to get an episode out just about every week. All right. Thank you again. Keep listening. We're looking forward to the future of additional episodes, and we're not ready to hang it up yet. We got many more to come and hopefully hundreds more. So we'll continue to bring the interesting interviews and continue to up our game as we try to bring you the information that will help you along your startup journey. All right, let's go. All right, next up, we got to shine a light on one company. We always do it on every episode. We're going to share a little bit about our community and one of the startups in our community. So today, that company is Synvia Games, which is it's basically an ecosystem that aims to simplify game developers' lives through automation, live preview, and publishing capabilities, and peer-to-peer real-time collaboration. If you're into gaming and you want to learn more about this or building games, learn more over at synvia.com. It's not with an S, it's with a C. So it's CINEVVA.com. CINEVVA.com to go learn more. Check it out. All right, now we're going to talk to Mike Evans. Been looking forward to it. Hi, Mike. Thanks so much for joining us on this 100th episode of the Startup of Your podcast. I'm super thrilled to have you today. Having a hometown Chicago entrepreneur here of your pedigree is obviously super exciting, but also having it on this 100th episode makes it even better. So thanks for joining today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
All right. So excited to have you here. You have obviously, people may not probably know you from GrubHub and being the co-founder of GrubHub and running that for years from bootstrap to IPO, but you've also got, you're also founder of a new company, Fixer.com. And can you just kind of jump in and give us kind of, for those that are not familiar, the quick version of GrubHub? Maybe they haven't ordered food ever. I don't know who hasn't, but maybe they haven't. And then kind of dive into a little bit more about Fixer, and then we'll jump into the book that just came out.
Yeah, GrubHub was in its initial incarnation was a delivery guide where you could find the menus of restaurants, and then it eventually became an online ordering platform, and it got real big, got up to about 80,000 restaurants by the time of the IPO. And really, what we did is we got new business for restaurants. That was our function. I left that company in 2014 at like 28 days after the IPO. Rode off into the sunset. Literally rode a bicycle from Virginia to Oregon, and then spent a few years at home before starting my next company, Fixer.com. Fixer is an on-demand handy person company where the people who do the work are full-time employees with benefits. We train them from scratch. And so we are trying to increase the supply and diversity, the skill and diversity of the skill and diversity of trades workers in the communities we serve. And by doing that, it allows us to create a great experience for people in their home. And so I launched that business with this idea in mind that I wanted to create a social impact in addition to creating profit. And the social impact is that there just aren't enough skilled tradespeople in our communities anymore because most of the trade schools have closed. And the people who do get into the trades, it's very gender exclusive. If you don't have an uncle to teach you, then you can't learn. And so we wanted to break open wide the entry path into the trades.
Very cool. And so true. Like there's, trying to get a plumber or somebody to do any kind of work. And it's, there's a lot of apps that are trying to help point you in the right direction, but I love the approach you're taking. I think I talked to you, were actually literally bringing these folks on, and you're even a B Corp, right? And so it's like
we're a B Corp, yeah.
Trying to basically, it's a really great story, and obviously love to watch that continue to grow.
If you have a business model, which is what a lot of the ones currently exist, that's, hey, we're going to connect you to a skilled contractor in your hometown. And there are not enough skilled contractors in your hometown. No. Being the connector is not a helpful thing to be.
No.
And so our idea is just to create more, to make more people available that can actually do the work.
And you actually train them, which is awesome. And so creating, and obviously there's just a lack of it. So I love that. And have you were focused on Chicago last we talked. Are you still just focused on Chicago, or are you looking at other markets too?
We are in Chicago, Seattle, Dallas, Denver, and Phoenix. And we are launching 2 more markets the next few weeks, but not sure exactly which ones yet.
Great. Congrats. That's awesome. You're definitely growing in different places. That's great.
Oh my gosh, it's growing like a weed. It's it's growing so fast. And it's like one of those, like, it took us 6 years to get to this point, get the model worked out. We weren't educators when we started. So when I'm like, hey, we're going to open a trade school, it's like with the typical arrogance of a startup, bro. Like, okay, well, I guess I got to learn how to educate people. Is that a thing people do? Yes, it turns out that millions of people are educators, and they know a lot more about it than I do. So, once we finally got all that wrapped up in the curriculum and the training program and the on-the-job apprenticeship and all of that stuff, and how to create a good consumer experience in the home, and then also survive COVID. Once all that was done, we now are finally like really exploding in terms of our size and our geographies.
That's a lot of hurdles, and it reminds me a little bit of the GrubHub story, because you guys did kind of turn it out on your own, not being part of that industry for a while. I mean, to build up what you eventually turned into a monster. So I think sounds very similar journey wise.
This time around is a little harder. It was hard the first time. It was harder this time, but I also had more resources, and I had done it once before, and so I ended up working just as hard. But I actually like the idea of picking really difficult, tricky, operationally intensive business models, because it's easier to build a differentiated business in a harder space. And so that's easy to say now with 5 years of work in the rearview mirror than it was like on day one, when I was like, oh my gosh, this is a lot.
Yeah, a lot of people would have given up. So I'll give you a major, I mean, because that's, if it's not easy, a lot of people kind of give up when it's not easy. And it sounds like you tackle the things that are hard. But I want to switch gears and talk about the book, Hangry. And it's a startup journey from you and your time with GrubHub and now Fixer. Love the book. Just finished it literally a
Thanks.
little bit before this
I
call.
like it too.
And I just like that it's so a matter of fact. Like it brings you along the journey, but it also gives you kind of the behind the scenes, and it's so a matter of fact. And in part of that is so first off, congrats. That's a
Thanks.
big feat in itself, to write the book and get it out there and now distribute it everywhere. And hopefully soon it'll be a bestseller and everyone will read your story. But the interesting thing is that you wrote it while, after you've kind of exited GrubHub, and while journeying across the country on your almost like eat, pray, love journey of your own, of like finding yourself again. I mean, it really was your eat, pray, love story of like getting across the country on your bike, 4,400 miles, 4,400 miles, right? And more or less looking for yourself, the self that you used to be, when you say, this is your own words, not mine. I've never thought this, but when you used to be not an asshole, which is kind of funny that you're like your own explanation.
If you were to take a graph my assholeness over time, right? It started at like a moderate level, and then through the course of GrubHub, that curve goes up and to the right, and it got pretty intense. And then the bike trip was the start of it coming back down again, back to moderate. I didn't come back all the way to not an asshole, but I mean, that was part of the whole journey of like what I was trying to accomplish at the company, and without like, I had to do some healing after some of the challenges I faced there.
There are a lot. I mean, you talk about a lot of them, right? You're grinding it out for 10 years. Your marriage took a hit. Your life took a hit. I would assume your health took a hit. That's a lot of stress. Yeah,
it's, I think you probably have heard what I'm about to say probably resonates with your experience talking to startups. There's like a sanitized version of the startup story.
Yep. Absolutely.
That's just totally false. And that version is you go to Stanford, you get an MBA. There's this friends and family money that shows up from somewhere. I don't know who these friends and family are, but like apparently people give you lots of money, and then that works beautifully. So then VCs give you even more money, and then you're a billionaire. And like, it does not work that way. Like, it might work that way for a few people, and it actually makes it even more infuriating because it's a lot. That's not the way it really goes. Like, when you're innovating, when you're creating a startup, you're trying to say, like, ultimately you're saying, there's this thing that's done wrong, and I'm going to fix it. I'm going to be the one who makes it better. And it's hard to know. It's impossible to know when you start what things are going to work and what things aren't. It's experimental in its nature. And so a lot of the book talks about this sort of paradox of like grit or quit, like this idea of, do you double down and do the hard work on this thing, or are you honest with yourself and saying, it's not working, so I'm going to stop doing it and try something else? It's really hard to know which one of those two things you do. And so I explore that a lot in the book, with ideas that work and ideas that don't. And it's not emotionally neutral to like try something really hard and then quit it. Like, there's a lot of damage that happens there. And so I try to explore a lot of those ideas in the book.
I love it. And I assume that's why you wrote the book too, is to kind of get that story out there. But you tell me, why did you write the book?
So I wrote the book because really for a few reasons, but the main reason is, startups especially, but like businesses all everywhere, but startups especially, when they become successful, they are a huge lever for social change, whether you want them to be or not. And if you're not thinking about that early, then that change is implicit and undirected. Like, we change the environments in which we work. We're like sort of like Schrodinger's cat. Like, like by existing, we change things, and we're not neutral to the environments we work in. And so if I can convince 10 people to be intentional about not just the shareholder value they're creating, but the community value, the community changes they're creating, or the stakeholder value they could create, and just being thoughtful and intentional about that as early as possible, even though it's hard, then the book's a success. That's what I was trying to do. So that's sort of the primary reason. The other reason is I just love hearing people's reactions from it, because ultimately when you create something, that's only half of the story. The other half is how people receive it. And I'm super interested in, like, people have been getting things out of this book. I'm like, did I write that? I don't think but hey, that's great. Like, tell me more. And that's really fun. It's really fun to go through that experience.
Where they're gathering more out of it than what you first anticipated is what you're saying. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. So in the book, you basically, I love that you share kind of those behind the scenes stories. And even like, I didn't know something. I knew you were a developer. I didn't realize you were literally coding the earliest, versions of GrubHub, and all the way for a while. Like you were actually building it, bootstrapping for a long time. And I love this to hear the stories, but also that the story of you and Matt, who ultimately you teamed up, talking about how you guys are always kind of were at each other, but it actually made you stronger. A lot of people don't share that, right? That's kind of the dirty laundry a little bit, and I think that's what I thought was really interesting. Is like you're literally very matter of fact about how things went, and obviously, I don't know if that's good or bad. Hopefully, you and Matt are okay. But at the end of the day,
there's a story, and it's a story of two founders who built this big business, and they never fought, and everything was happy. And that story is just false, right?
Yeah,
Like you're doing stuff that matters, and so there's tension in it because we're all human, right?
Yeah.
And I can say with all certainty that if Matt wasn't involved in the company, we would not have IPO'd the company. And I can also say if I wasn't involved in the company, it would have never actually started, right? So, so the compromises that we came to and the compliments that we did that we had with each other, it worked. It worked, but it wasn't without tension. And so I think that'll be helpful for people who are like, oh, like, what does a good partnership look like? It doesn't look perfect. And so, yeah, I mean, that was, I did share all of those things, the warts and all. But ultimately it's not the story of how to create a startup. It's not the story of GrubHub. It's the story of like what it's like to personally, like for me, what is it like for a person to go through the reality of creating something from nothing? And so a lot of the story focuses on me, and I don't mean that to take away from Matt's contributions. It's just that was the narrative choice I was making.
No, it's your perspective. It makes sense. You don't know what he's thinking, so that totally makes sense. All right, so let's dive in a little bit deeper here. So, part of the reason it's called Hangry is because you were outraged by the certain components of what was happening with GrubHub. Could you, I would imagine that puts some people like in an uncomfortable position, and so I wanted to get your take on that. Like, were you nervous about talking about this publicly?
Yeah, I was nervous about it. Nobody's asked me that question actually, so I appreciate that. Yeah, I was nervous about it. GrubHub was my baby, and even though my baby's grown up, and in some ways, like, I literally say in the book, I asked the question, "Did I create a Frankenstein?" And I don't ask that out of a place of sour grapes. I ask that out of a place of, I have a high bar of expectation for how companies should act in the environments that they live in and that they work in. And GrubHub, along with Uber Eats and DoorDash and all the other companies, they have an obligation to do right by restaurants because that's their customers. They're the ones who ultimately they rely on, and they're the ones that they're creating products to help. And so I'm frank in the book about places where the company's fallen short of that, not out of a place of sour grapes, like I said, but out of a desire to see that company or other companies do better. And you can do that and make a profit. And part of my point is, when you do right by your customers, you create competitive differentiation. And when you do that, you don't have to just keep buying customers to keep them around. Like, you don't have to keep paying for Google. They stay around because your company is valuable to them. And so I think it's a recipe for success just as much as it is in some ways a critique of some of the things they've done. That's a lot more diplomatic than the way I put it in the book. I'm just pissed off about it in the book. I do get frustrated. I get frustrated when I hear stories about high take rates and not listening to restaurant partners because I care, not because I'm bitter about it.
Yeah, I mean, and the purpose of why you started to begin with, it kind of started to change a little bit, and I could see that being something that you didn't want to like leave behind, right? Like, this is near and dear, like you said, it's your baby. You want to direct it in the right direction and the direction that you can align with, and I think that's part of why you're doing that. So that totally makes sense to me. But then eventually you get to a point where you've had it. You've been doing this for over a decade, and you're just like, I can't do this anymore. That's a hard decision in itself, right? Because you've been,
Yeah.
or maybe it wasn't. I don't know. After all the
Yeah,
things
let's
you've been
talk
through.
about that.
Yeah, I don't know. Was it hard? Like,
Let's talk about the nature of the decision, because
yeah.
it has to do with how a person defines success. And one of the big points in the book is that you need a personal definition of success. Like, everybody will spoon feed you one, right?
Right.
Your parents, your kids, government, churches, everybody and everyone will try to define success for you.
Mm-hmm.
And this has happened to me personally. A lot of people have said to me, like, oh, you were successful because you had an IPO, or you're successful because you made some money at the IPO. I wasn't successful for those reasons. I was successful because I created a company that helped 80,000 independent restaurants thrive. And that was what I was trying to accomplish. And I did accomplish that. And so I perceived myself as successful because of that. Mm-hmm. And my definition of success is closely related to my goals. And as the company went through the transition of being public, it became very clear to me that the primary goal of helping independent restaurants thrive versus sort of the pressures of big chains wasn't going to be something that the company prioritized. And so since my goals and the company's goals departed, I decided to leave. I didn't do it because I was burnt out. I didn't do it because I was tired. I didn't do it because I didn't think I have anything else to contribute.
Right.
I did it because I want my effort, my energy, my work to be going towards my definition of success. And right. That has to, in business, for me, that means it has to have a positive social impact. Right. And so that's why I left. But in fact, I was tired also. That's not why I left, but in fact, I was. And so, like all tired people do, I went on a 4,500-mile bike ride.
Right. No, I mean, yeah, absolutely. But no, I think that does matter, right? Like there's an amount of, like, you're going up against resistance at a certain point, and you're doing it for that long. I think at a certain point, you're just like, I don't want to fight anymore. Right? Is what it kind of sounds like. And because you knew you were going to be going to literally an uphill battle against, in this case, probably shareholder greed, is really what it's about. Right?
Yeah. I mean, it's nuanced, but it's not quite what you just said about, I don't want to fight anymore. It's different. It's a much more clinical and objective view where I encourage people to say, is this fight is it likely to work? Is it likely to bring me closer to my goals, or the company closer to what I want that company
what you want it to do? Right.
And if it looks unlikely to occur, it's a good time to quit, right? Go put your energy towards something where it is likely to occur. Right. And it's not a matter of not having the fight in me, because clearly I'm still feisty. I didn't lose that on the bike trip.
No.
And so, it's an important distinction, because entrepreneurs need to be good at quitting things. And that includes knowing the right reasons to quit things, as opposed to just giving up because you're too tired.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. What's the difference between quitting and giving up? You talk about that in the book.
Yeah. At its simplest form, giving up is what happens at the end of a long day, and quitting is what happens in the morning when you're fresh, right? Like, quitting is a decision, and giving up is exhaustion.
Right.
Like at its core, that's what I'm trying to say. And that it's always better to quit something because you've decided you want to go work towards something else. You're not just leaving a thing, you're headed towards something else. And then I name it that because I want to take the stigma out of this idea of quitting, in the sense that beating your head against the wall for something that's not in line with your goals or your values, or is not the direction you want your life to go, simply because you've been doing it, like that's just glorifying hustle. That's not useful to anyone. Right. And so I talk about, like, you do have to work hard. You do have to blast through obstacles. You do have to, like, have a lot of grit and a lot of tenacity. But at some point, you also have to say, this ain't working. I'm doing something else. And that's what happened to GrubHub. I left that and I started another company that was more in line with what I wanted to accomplish.
That makes sense. So you talk about a number of people in the book, one of which that keeps popping up is, it sounds like might be a mentor, Chuck Templeton from OpenTable. Would you consider him a mentor?
Yeah. He was a mentor, and now we're just friends. He's not really a mentor anymore. Right. I learned a ton from him. I mean, I learned, he didn't say it in so many words, but I learned how to have empathy for coworkers. And even just the way I said that, I didn't say employees, right? I talk about my coworkers, my colleagues. There was other things that he did, like with customers. When a customer call came in with an issue, we didn't deal with the customer. We worked with the customer. And so, like, I learned this language of empathy and connection and how to make appropriate apologies and fix the problems that caused the issue in the first place. I learned a lot of that from Chuck. And then I got 15 years to like practice it. And so now I think I'm pretty good at those things now.
Right.
But I learned a lot of it from him. And if I can pass those lessons along, and he learned them from other people as well, right? Like he had his mentors. He talks about, he's one of the heads of Let Us Entertain You restaurants. It's his father-in-law who mentored him. Oh gosh, I can't remember his name right now. But like there's a chain of these people. And it's my hope that in a mass and scalable way, the book does that for some other people, and they can learn a thing or two about how to like lead with empathy.
No, definitely. And I guess for you, are there other mentors you had, and how do you find a good mentor? I mean, I guess that's
just the one. I never learned anything from it.
Just Chuck. That was it. Me and Chuck.
This is going to sound trite, especially since I just wrote a book, but I learned a lot from books. The Selling for Dummies book that I talk about in my book, like I learned a lot about how to do sales there and putting reps in, like practicing it. I learned a lot about there's a book with, I hate the name of it, but The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Yeah. It's so good, right? Yeah. Like that book talks about, the difference between importance and urgency. And after I had bootstrapped for like 6 years or 7 years, I read Eric Ries's Lean Startup Circle. And I was like, oh, that's what I just did. Like, this is great. Right. And then Good to Great by Jim Collins. And so I consider some of those folks my mentors, even though I never met them. Like, I feel like I met their ideas. They spoke but then I had other people that were in my life too, that especially at a young age, 12, 13, 14, that were really impactful in terms of mentorship. Yeah. So like, it's been a theme my whole life.
Definitely. Interesting. Did you experience, I guess, imposter syndrome ever did you ever experience imposter syndrome? You're like, wow, I'm so successful. Do I feel like I should be?
It's funny you say that in the past tense.
Yeah.
I am still experiencing imposter syndrome.
Oh, you are? Okay.
I have all along.
Yeah.
And I think that part of the reason why I sort of like talk about intentionality and goal setting and success so much is because it's my bastion, it's my wall against imposter syndrome, which is sort of at the gates, right? Like it's always threatening. And I think of it like, you know what? I don't have to listen to that voice in my head if I've defined what success is for myself. And if I know that on a day-to-day basis, I'm working towards it, then that voice doesn't have a lot of power. And it's not just imposter syndrome. It's just sort of self-doubt naturally. The people I know who have no self-doubt and no imposter syndrome are total narcissists. And I think it's actually a good thing to have it, recognize it, and work through it, as opposed to just denying that it exists.
Right. That makes sense. So when you first started GrubHub, everything was new, right? You're a new entrepreneur. I think this is your first company, right? So what are some of the most...
Actually, I had a lawn mowing business when I was in high school. And I learned a lot about customer satisfaction and also bees during that time.
Stay away from bees. Yes,
stay
definitely.
away from the bees.
Yes. So I guess with that and GrubHub, and now even into Fixer, what are some most important things you learned aside from the bees thing? Because that's obvious. You don't want to. Don't mess with the bees.
Yeah, don't mess with the bees. Unless you're a beekeeper, I guess that's a hard rule if that's your business. Yeah, I mean, I've learned a lot. I try to put some of the lessons in the book. Obviously the stuff about intentionality and the importance of experimentation and quitting things that don't work. On a personal level, one thing that comes up again and again is there's a culture within startups where people say like, if you think that you need to let somebody go from your company, you're already too late. You should have done it 2 months ago. There's sort of this like cavalier and callous attitude towards firing people that's fairly prevalent in startup culture. Yeah. And I think it's total bullshit. I don't think you can be a good leader without also having the pain involved of firing people. And even saying that is ridiculous because I'm sure the people that I've had to let go are like, oh, that's easy for you to say. You still did it to me. But it should be hard. It should be very hard. So that's one thing that I say often to new entrepreneurs. I guess another thing that I say to new entrepreneurs is you're not charging enough. I don't even have to know what you're charging. I just know it's true. Entrepreneurs never charge enough for their product initially, because they're scared people won't buy it. And so that's like, you can't make pricing decisions out of fear, right? Like you have to be bold. There's a few things like that, but for the rest of me, like, you're just gonna have to buy the book. It's full, chock full.
Well, I've got one that I outlined. So
Great.
some of your Mike's rules for hard things. What are they? And
so number one, there's 5 of them. Number one, hard things are hard. That sounds silly, but it's true. They're hard, and sometimes they're great, but it doesn't make them less hard. They have consequences. Often hard things require a lot of effort and prioritization, and that means something else has got to give. And sometimes that thing might be relationships or health or something like that. But they also have big rewards. This rule number 3 is hard things have big rewards. And number 4, which I sort of hinted at just earlier, is don't give up hard things at the end of a long day. Wait until morning.
Take sleep on it, and then figure it out the next day.
Yeah, and this really came out of the bike trip more than it was the business. That when you're hurting and tired and sweaty, it's really easy to be like, frick this, I'm done.
Right.
You sleep for a night, you wake up in the morning, you're like, I can do one more day. And that's all you have to do. You don't have to finish the trip. I didn't take a 4,500 mile bike ride. I took 90 50-mile bike rides.
Right. One day at a time. Right.
One day at a time. Right. And then this is sort of like the big exclamation point of the book, is that hard things become easier when you have a vision. If you know where you're headed, it's a lot easier to do the day-to-day grind. And if you don't, I don't know how people do it. You cannot, it's too much of a marathon to just muscle through. You've got to know where you're going, and you have to pace yourself.
Right. No, that makes sense. All right. So you talked a lot about, in the book and just in general, just a minute ago, you've talked a lot about intentionality and being, some of that is so that you're feeling fulfilled at work. Is there any other ways that you can kind of share that, like how you find that fulfillment at work if you're not like enjoying what you're doing or whatever?
Yeah, so you mentioned you have a 7-year-old daughter. I also have a 7-year-old daughter.
Yep.
When she goes to school, work and play and learning, they're all the same thing. There's no distinction between those things for a kid. I argue that it's the same for adults, and we've just forgotten that.
Yeah.
And I find work very satisfying and very fun in the cases where what I'm doing is aligned with my goals and my values. Now, is every meeting fun? No. Like, I'm not trying to argue that.
Right.
But most of them, I'm working with people I respect and I like spending time with. I'm trying to create things that make the world a better place. I think it's a huge part of it. I think human beings are wired to work and to find satisfaction from our work. And that can only happen when it's aligned with your values. And I kind of think it's selling ourselves short when we just go into work for a paycheck. Certainly sometimes you just have to do that. You have other responsibilities, you have other requirements on you, and you need to just pay the bills. And sometimes, but those are the worst kind of jobs. And so if you have the privilege and the ability to choose your work, then it can be very satisfying and very fun. And so, I think intentionality, there's a short line between being intentional about where you work and what you do and just having a good day. Those two things are pretty close to each other.
Absolutely. And then how have you been able to align those values, vision of your company, like with Fixer, for example, from with an individual or a collective of people? How do you kind of work to make that part of your culture?
Yeah. I sort of have a formula for this that I generally use, which is don't create the mission statement values in the first day of the company. Wait till you're about a year in, maybe 18 months in, and there's 20 of you. Right. And then get together as a group and define what your core values are and define what your mission is as a group. So it's not just one person. It's not a cult of personality. It's not just one person deciding things by fiat, but it's the thing we decided as a group we care about. It's much more powerful that way. It also brings to light and really makes clear the distinction between the company's goals and my goals. And those two things are not the same thing. They should be related, and I should understand how they're related and how they influence each other. But it's important that I hold them separate in my own mind. And so that's a part of it. And so at Fixer, we did that. We got together, we met on the core values, we decided our mission statement, which is we fix things, we build people. But then it's also encoded, like, so that's like the socialization, like the federating the thing socially among the people in the business. But there's also like a whole legal side to it where we're a public benefit corporation. We literally have our articles of incorporation state that it's as important to us as a company, the company exists for two reasons: to create shareholder value and to increase the skill and diversity of tradespeople in the communities we serve. And those two things are of equal importance, which is a really weird corporate structure, to be able to sacrifice shareholder value for a social benefit. Right. But that's literally what a public benefit corporation is. And so it's not just what we feel about it and think about it, but it's encoded in the DNA of the company itself. We do everything from hiring with it. Our fixers get bonuses at the end of the year based on whether or not the core values show up in the reviews that customers write about us.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
And we encourage them to game the system. Like, yes, if you can get your customers to say you're honest, that's all good, right? Because it's really hard to do that while being dishonest, right?
Right.
So,
yeah. Right, exactly.
And so we use it for bonuses. We spend tens of thousands of dollars of bonuses based on the core values of the company. We have it in hiring. It's at the beginning of every meeting. And so it's obviously an important part of what we do. And part of the reason is I'm not going to be at Fixer forever. And when I leave, I want the company to continue on a trajectory of making the world a better place, while we make a crazy large amount of profit, right? Like, this is not a nonprofit business, right? And so that's like, it's a lot of what we do.
No, that makes sense. Really cool. I love that you're able to do that. And it sounds like some of those things were pulled from your experiences with GrubHub and what things maybe didn't go the way you wanted them to. So now you're doing it the way you want it to in this new company.
Yeah, at GrubHub, it worked. Like, we did level the playing field for independent restaurants, and we were really beneficial. And the company still is really beneficial for restaurants, which is not to say that I can't do better. And I certainly, in the book, you can see my frustration as those two things diverge.
Right.
GrubHub is not an oil company.
No.
Doing good, right?
No, right.
And in fact, they're doing better than they get credit for in the press, but that's partly because, for whatever reason, the company's not great. But like, they just don't speak to these issues. They don't engage, right? They sort of stick their head in the ground sometimes. But I think that the company is a force for good, but could be better.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, your biggest kind of thing that kind of irked you was more or less the change to, get as much out of some of the, I guess, pricing model basically is what kind of got you, right? And that's
restaurants can thrive at a 15% take rate.
Right.
They can get tons more business and do really well. They can't when the number is much higher.
Right.
And unfortunately, as the top three players in the space have become less differentiated, more and more of their profits have to just go to advertising to convince people to come join instead of to loyalty, right? Instead of having loyalty of their customers. And so, the price of differentiation actually ends up being on the backs of either the drivers or the restaurants. And so my hope is that one of those three companies really differentiates, and then it creates more value for those two stakeholders.
Right. That makes sense.
And my true hope is that GrubHub is the one that wins that.
Right. Of course. You're still
like, I still want that one to win. I still want that company to win.
Absolutely. I get it. Until, forever. And I get it. It's your baby. I guess what you're sharing in the book and what we're talking about isn't that you are a dislike for the company. It's just that maybe some of the things that happened weren't in alignment with your personal, I guess you could say, values and goals. So that's more or less what happened. And that happens, right? As you grow. I mean, you've built a monster. Okay. So let's switch gears. You also learned some things, I think, from rejection. You had to go out and sell. You and Matt were selling those first businesses on using GrubHub, and I'd love to get any lessons or mistakes or things you learned on selling, because wasn't your background to begin with, and so you obviously had to pick it up as you go, and and obviously got really good at it.
I got okay at it. I never got really good at it. Sales was not my jam. I talk about this in the book. I went and got a Selling for Dummies book, and the sort of, if I were to give like a quick 1-minute introduction to sales, I would say a sales conversation consists of 3 parts: You ask the customer what their needs are, you share how you can solve those problems, and then you ask for the money. And you have to listen, share, close.
Right.
And you have to do them in that order. If you mix up the order, you lose the customer. You can't try and ask for the money before they are convinced that you can bring them value, and you can't convince them that you can bring them value until you actually know what their needs are. And so like that was sort of the first part of it. But there is a big part of it that's rejection. I got thrown out of a lot of restaurants, and I was terrified because I quit my job, and for the first 3 weeks I couldn't sell any restaurants. And I think one thing to recognize about rejection is that it hurts. Like a lot of sales books will try and get you revved up to this idea of like, just shake it off, like just get like, but I think actually it's better to say like, rejection sucks. Stew in it for a moment, like feel it, put it in a box and move on. Because if you don't like, if you're just trying to deny that it really sucks, I think that's not healthy. And I say this in a kind of a cavalier way. I mean, in the current, in November of 2022 or October of 2022, the macroeconomic environment is terrible for startups to raise venture capital.
Yep.
And I've created a multi-billion-dollar business, and I've been getting the door slammed in my face. Like, and I'm like, this hasn't happened before. Like since the IPO, like it's easy for me to talk to VCs, but suddenly it's gotten very hard. And it hurts. It still hurts after 20 years of doing it. My solution to that is I create a process. I'm going to call 10 VCs tomorrow, or if I was calling restaurants, I'd call 50 restaurants tomorrow, regardless of the number of successes I had yesterday, or the number of failures I had yesterday. The amount of activity that I do is not dependent on my success level. It's set, it's disciplined. I do it every day. And then it sort of takes a little bit of the sting out of the rejection, because like, it's just another day, not all of it. But that's been like sort of my way to handle sort of sales rejection.
I love that. And you are 100% right. There's been kind of a slowdown on investment in general. I mean, I was just, all the startups we work with, they're all raising. No one's getting, there's a few companies getting checks, but not that many. And I think hopefully this kind of switches gears at some point here soon. But yeah, that's a great point of how that rejection. I even saw somebody reach out recently saying, hey, I just got rejected. I thought this was going to happen. What do I do? And it's like, well, my suggestion was shake it off, go to sleep, because it was nighttime. I was like, go to sleep, wake up tomorrow and start again. Because you've got there's more people to talk to. And especially in venture, it can be a million different reasons. It's not necessarily because of you and your thing is, right? So I think that's important too. And obviously from a store perspective, when you're selling these restaurants, it's not you guys. It was maybe they were really excited about the way they were doing things and it was working. It doesn't necessarily mean you were doing something bad. Well,
I will say this: if you are getting, it is worth looking at what you're saying, what you're doing,
right,
what you're pitching, and seeing. It's worth at least reviewing whether or not might be me.
Right,
it might not actually be them. You may actually be just bad at sales, and so you do have to have it's weird. It's a paradox because you have to have enough arrogance to say, nope, this is valuable. I'm going to keep selling, and enough humility to be like, okay, what do I need to change? Right. Which one of those things do you do in a given moment? I don't know. That's the hard part of startups.
No, that's right. Yeah, you got to kind of figure that out. And it sounds like, over time you do, because, it's a little bit of trial and error there. I guess you kind of already gave some advice, but, what is, I guess, the best lessons learned for you with this entire journey? Like number one lesson, if you could walk away and say, I just want to make sure anybody who sees me knows this lesson for this book.
Start. Whatever it is that you want to do. If you want to start a company, start it. Don't overthink it. Don't do market research. Don't hire a lawyer to figure out how to do business. Like just sell a product to a customer, which of course means you had to make a product, but just start. There's a tremendous amount of things you can learn about startups. You can learn about financing, you can learn about sales, you can learn about marketing, you can learn about scaling, you can learn about operations, you can learn about HR and policy and all of these things. All of that is 49% of success. 51% of success is starting. You literally just need to go do it. And that's my one piece of advice. The best way to start is to start.
I love that. And that made me think of one more thing. And it's not really just starting. It's just related to the feeling, right? Like you did start. You brought something to life. You bootstrapped really hard for a long time. You got funding, and that you signed terms that necessarily weren't good for you all, but you did it because it was the right move at the time, and built it into something really big, multi-billion-dollar company, right? That doesn't happen to everyone. It doesn't happen every day.
Yeah, everyone should do it. It's fun.
Well, everyone should do it, but it doesn't happen to everyone to do that,
I know.
right?
I'm aware.
So either way, I want to know from your perspective, what was that like to feel like at the end of the day when you're out and you're IPOing? Have you ever had a second where you're just like, holy shit, we did it? Like, oh my God, like what does that feel like? Like, what is the feeling that you got? Like, was it joy? Was it like, exhaustion? Was it just like relief? Like, what does that feel like from your perspective? Because not too many people are in that boat that could say that.
Yeah, it's no one simple thing. It's like all the feels at once. It was exciting. It was, I felt a ton of excitement. I felt joy, like euphoric joy at like, I did it. Like we did it. I felt relief. Like there's fear in the entrepreneurial journey. You're afraid a competitor is going to come and crush your business. You're afraid that you're going to run out of money. You're afraid that you're going to mess it up. And so like getting to the point where I could leave on a high note, like was a tremendous amount of relief. There was grief, like when you work on something for 12 years and then suddenly you're not, and like you pick up your phone to check your email and you're like, oh, I don't have that account anymore. Like there's grief there. And there's satisfaction, the financial benefits, there's satisfaction being able to help my family. It's nice to be able to like buy nice things, like go on a vacation and like not worry about the cost. Like, it's all of those things. And then there was even a bit of longing. There's like, gosh, I want to get back to that golden age again and do that again, which is why I started another thing. I like, it's a powerful drug. Like I wanted more of it. And so, it's all those things. You feel all of those things.
Right. That's great. And that's what I was looking for. I really appreciate you sharing that. And I think our listeners will obviously find it helpful. Mike, thank you so much for joining and sharing your stories. Where can people find a copy of the book if they want to?
Yeah, Audible is probably if you're listening to this through your headphones, then you'll get it on Audible.
I love you read your own book. I mean,
I read it.
And that's not easy to do. That's actually really hard. So.
It was a blast. It was really fun because there's some like big emotional moments in the book, and it was fun to just like nail them, like just like really like say them out loud.
Yeah.
Or you can find more information at MikeEvans.com.
MikeEvans.com. There it is. Thanks so much, Mike. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was great to be on. Thanks, Frank.
Well, I always love catching up with Mike Evans and hearing his stories about everything that it takes to start up a company and take it to IPO. As I mentioned, he was part of some of our earliest events, so it's been great to see, the progression and obviously watch it from the outside. And now we can read about it from the inside. If you listen to this podcast or read his book, Hangry, you can go over to MikeEvans.com or wherever books are sold to find more out about that book. It should be pretty interesting for you. There's a lot of stories he didn't include in the book, but didn't talk about in the podcast today that you'll probably find interesting, funny, eye-opening, all the above. So check it out if you get a chance. I really enjoyed the book and hope you do too. And speaking of enjoying, if you enjoyed this conversation with Mike, please do share it with somebody you think might find it helpful. We're all about sharing, and we want to, as I mentioned earlier, continue to grow this podcast and audience and get to as many people as possible, and that's one way of doing it. So please do share this podcast with anybody you think might find it helpful, that is starting a company or is in the space or thinking about getting into the space. We'd love to have you join our community. So please do. And before we wrap the episode, I also wanted to share a little bit about what we're up to in the next few months. We do have an event coming up. It's part of our Grow Your Startup series. It's a pitch event, and we've got 5 startups that are going to compete from our community. They're going to, pitch a set of investors, VC judges, that are going to hopefully give some advice and help them as they grow and iterate their companies. So it's all about growing. It's not about winning in this situation. And so we want to make sure that we have, some great companies, but also great judges that can give that kind of feedback. So look forward to the event. And if you want to join the event and you want to learn more about it, about the event timeline, the application, and the event registration, it can all be found over at soty.link /grow pitch 2022. Again, it's soty.link /grow pitch 2022. And we hope to see you at our event over on online. It's virtual, so you should be able to make it. Like, geez, it's virtual. You can, if you can't make it on your computer, you can make it on your phone or your iPad or your tablet. Just go over to sign up again, soty.link/GrowPitch 2022, and we'll see you on December 13th. Be there or be square. All right, well, that's the show today. Hope you enjoyed listening. As always, this is number 100. 100. That's a lot. We've been doing this a little bit, so we're excited, and hopefully hundreds of more. But if you have a startup idea and you want to get it going, today is the best day to start up. Not tomorrow, not the next day. Get it going, get it started, and in doing so, join our community for access to support, expert advice, and all the resources you might need to elevate your startup by simply going to startupofyear.com or go to soty.link/apply and join our community today. Until next time, I'm Frank Gruber. Don't forget to hug your loved ones, and good luck out there starting up. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Startup of the Year podcast. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll be back with another episode soon.